This is Omi Sade Bernie Scott, and welcome to the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause. I'm so excited about this latest episode. In this episode, I had the opportunity to interview Barbara Jessie Black. Barbara was born in Germany to a German mother and an African-American father who was serving in the military. And so the experiences that we got to talk about during this interview not only have to do with identity, but also energy and openness and what it means for a person to be able to define themselves for themselves without all of the labels that society puts on you. You get to define yourself for yourself. You get to embrace all of who you are culturally, ethnically, all of who you love, no matter what their gender may be, all of the expressions of you. So this is a beautiful interview. I think folk are going to enjoy it. I know I did. And I appreciated the reminder that no matter what society tells you who you are, as long as you know who you are, that's the most important thing. So sit back and relax and enjoy this latest episode of the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause. My name is Omi Sade Bernie Scott, and this is the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause, introducing Barbara Jessie Black. Hey, Barbara.
Hello, Omi. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
I'm lovely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for saying yes. So you were probably one of the first people to say yes last year when I reached out to a number of Black women that I really love and respect who live here in my local community in North Carolina to say, look, I want to do this podcast thing with Black women talking about our lives as it relates to menopause, but not necessarily about menopause. Mm-hmm. And you were a quick yes. It was like, pew, quick, like that kind of quick.
Which is so not in my comfort zone. So I surprised myself when I said a quick yes, but I also realized that it was something that was important to talk about, and realize that things that are out of your comfort zone, but that come to you energetically, are meant to be explored. So thank you for bringing that to me energetically to allow me to explore that.
Well, you're welcome. So I just want to have a conversation with you kind of based on who I know you to be. We've had so many conversations over the years about our own journeys, as women. So now that we're in a new decade, I've been thinking a lot about our generational footprint, like our identity as it relates to our generation and how we're going to experience this next 10 years. Mm-hmm. And that made me think about how you and I are generational cusp, right? You're like in that tail end of boomers, right, and I'm on the beginning of Gen X. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you've been thinking about that at all as we were moving into this new space.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I was born in 1963, and I feel, to your point about the cusp and being sort of at the end of the baby boomers, I've always felt really young. So generationally, when I look at people who are who are part of the baby boomer generation, some of those folks I have a lot in common with, but there's also that component where I have nothing in common with them, based on sort of how I move through the world and how I choose to move through the world, I should say. And so I have been thinking about it, especially when I listened to your Instagram video relative to, this is the decade that you turn 63 or 62. And I thought, wow, this is the decade I turned 67. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? And what am I going to be like when I'm 67? So those sorts of things have kind of come up. But most of the time I'm sort of in the now, and that has taken me some time to get to. Sometimes I forget what day of the week it is, simply because I'm trying to be more present. And so even though I'm part of the end of the baby boomers, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, because I'm trying to look forward and or be in the now. And typically the now means for me, what can I learn right this moment? What does that look like? How does that inform my next step? But I do hear you. I mean, there is that sort of thinking about, 10 years from now, I'm going to be close to 70. Yeah.
You are, I think, was considered, astrologically speaking, in your second Saturn return.
Oh.
So your first Saturn return is between, I think, 27, 28, and maybe 30. And that first Saturn return is all about identity.
Right.
It's about who you want to be, what relationships that you're going to let go of, what relationships you're going to be more committed to, maybe even your career path or your vocation or your practice. It's like these things are being revealed, and sometimes they're revealed or you experience them in a hard way. I know that many people talk about their first Saturn return as being challenging.
Right.
Like, feels like it's disruptive.
Right.
You know, it's like you've moved out of this phase in your early 20s into this phase of like, so are you going to be partnered? Are you going to be a parent? Or if you have a particular art or craft, are you going to double down and go deeper into this art or craft? Like, what are you going to do?
Right.
And who are you going to be?
Right.
But the second Saturn return, you have the benefit of having all of that experience.
Right.
Right. And so the second Saturn return is almost like a second puberty moment of like, you know, you still get to decide who you want to be, how you want to live, what brings you joy, what relationships are no longer useful.
Right.
And so that's actually like the cosmological window that you are situated in right now, which seems to jive really well with you wanting to be very much in the practice of being focused and being in the present.
Absolutely. And it's super liberating. I've read once years ago that everyone has a time period or a decade that they are truly meant to be sort of living, right? We feel comfortable in a particular decade or 2 decades. And for me, it's been since I turned 45 to now, this is who I'm supposed to be. Right. And so I've leaned into that. I explore myself in a way that my meditation has changed, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a few minutes. My spiritual practice has shifted somewhat, and I feel really grounded. And I feel like this is the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. This is sort of my takeoff. Right. So this is the time period that I feel my best and that I'm supposed to be the best.
Why do you think that is?
You know, it's funny. I don't really know. I have felt the shift to your point about, you know, when you're in your 20s, you're just still trying to figure out what's happening. I mean, I know people in their 20s who feel, for whom their 20s seem to be like the thing, right? They feel super secure. And, you know, obviously some of that is maybe a function of education or whatever the situation is. But I always felt that my 20s and even to some degree my 30s didn't feel right on me, right? I just didn't feel comfortable in them. Whereas when I hit my 40s, and especially my mid 40s to now, I feel like I feel my best. I look my best. I looked at pictures not too long ago, and I thought to myself, gosh, that was you when you were 30-something years old. And I look, I mean, obviously I look somewhat the same because, you know, it's me. But as far as how I feel like this is my time. And so exploring all of the things that I want to do, and things that I know that I want to do, but also things that I haven't even discovered yet that I want to do is super exciting for me. So yeah.
It has anything to do with you being a Capricorn?
Possibly. It's really funny. When I look at sort of what Capricorns are, I fit some of that, but I also realize that a lot of it is you can break out of that based on how you interact with life, right? So what it brings you, what energy you put out. And so I have Capricorn friends who are very Capricorn. But when I look at myself, I realize, I got a little bit of that Capricorn, but I'm also much freer. Yeah. Right? I try not to put myself right in that box. Sure. Which, that's part of my identity is I'm multicultural, I'm biracial, and so I think that's also part of it.
Yeah. I think that for me, when I think about astrologically the age that is associated with a particular astrological sign, or how they'll describe how a sign will respond at different phases of their life, like you take it with a grain of salt, because you also have to take in consideration that there's more to a person than their sun sign or their moon sign or their rising. Right. There's also the context in which they were born into and raised and everything like that. And you've shared with me what your journey has been and origin story. You know, we go there all the time. It's like your origin story of being biracial, being raised in a military family, living in Europe, in Germany, most of your life. And so I'm wondering how that informs kind of where you are now, and like one in terms of your identity, but also how this moment in time feeling so spacious for you.
Right. So I'll say, you know, my mother was a real free spirit. And of course, you know, it's funny. A lot of times we only know our parents by the fact that they're our parents. And then once they've passed, you know, hopefully we're fortunate enough, or even when they're still alive, to know them as full human beings. And I knew my mother somewhat, but only after she passed was I told that she was a real free spirit. I mean, she did some things in her early 20s that before I was born that just, you know, would make your hair stand up, right? I mean, you know, just, and from a function of wanting to see the world and wanting to be more free. And so that said, you know, I was born at a time when I was born in Germany. My parents were married in Germany. I was born a few months before the Loving decision was made here in the United States. And so that in and of itself, just the way that I came to be, I was also born 4 years before my parents got married. So just having that kind of openness and freeness, that sort of sets you up for a life of, if you so choose, of freedom to some degree. I would say that my identity as I was growing up, I always knew I was different. Not just the way I looked, but also the way I moved through the world. As a child, I was very intuitive. I'm an empath and always have been. Of course, you know, you and I both know that when you're an empath, you spend a lot of time blocking energy. If you're not careful, you absorb both positive and negative energy. So I always felt that there was something, I hate to use the term special, but I'll just say something special about me. Aside from the fact that I had this identity of being amongst the friends that I had, I was one of only two that identified as both black and white. That said, I knew very little about my American side of the family. I mean, you know, it's funny because in the 70s, my father would come to the States, and my dad's from Texas, and would visit my grandmother and et cetera. And I would always make a gift so that my grandmother in the States could have it. And hadn't really, I met her once when I think the first time I met her, I was 5. And then I didn't see her again until I was a teenager. We moved to the States in the late 70s, and then, you know, she was still alive. But I remember going to her house and realizing that everything I had ever made all those years had a place in her home. I was brought up with mostly my white family. Of course, on base, you know, multicultural. I feel incredibly German. I've been to Germany in the last couple of years, twice now. But I'm also extremely black. And so being able to embrace those identities as I've gotten older has been brilliant, I will say. Because when I was younger, it was being a part of a military household and family, you were taught to be multicultural and, you know, that you embrace diversity, which there, again, nothing wrong with that. And obviously I love the whole notion of diversity. But that also meant that to some degree, the black side of my family, because I didn't experience it on a regular basis, took a back seat. And my German family was the primary family with which I spent time. When I came to the States, it was reversed. I spent more time with my black family than I did with my white family, white side of the family. And I will say that as much as I love being German, I feel that for me, being a person of color, being a black female is paramount, right? And I think part of that is because in the world in which we find ourselves here in the United States, I feel more black than I do German, but I'm also very culturally and ethnically German. I know that when I go to Germany, I see my family, and of course, you know, my family is very blonde, very Aryan looking. But when I look at my aunt and my cousin, I see Barbara, right? I mean, I see shades of Barbara. So from a cultural and ethnic perspective, I feel very German. But when it comes to what feeds my soul and my heart, I am very black. I once had a friend tell me that I was the blackest woman they knew, and I had to chuckle because this person was much blacker, much quote unquote blacker than I am. And I chuckled at that because, at face value, when you see me and meet me, I don't come across that way. But I feel that's my heart, that's my soul. And so, yeah, it's been interesting over the years. I've allowed myself to be more of that.
Yeah.
And I think that comes with age and experience and just being comfortable with who you are. I don't quote unquote sound black, which is, you and I laugh at, we've talked about that. We've had
this conversation several times about what that's supposed to be. I did a photo shoot the other day I did a photo shoot with a local photographer, and she asked me, I guess it was to warm me up a little bit. She was like, tell me a story. I said, oh, okay. I'll tell you a story about the first fight I ever got into. She was like, oh, you've been in a fight? I was like, I have. And it was when we moved back to North Carolina from Maryland. And I was in the 8th grade. And one of the reasons why I felt like I got in this fight or ended up in this fight is because of my affect. And my affect actually wasn't white. It was just different. We used to come to North Carolina all the time, like every single summer. Holidays, celebrations, funerals, all kinds of things. So it's not like it was foreign to me. I was born here, right? But my affect was very Prince George's County, Maryland, which translated to the girls who were in my 8th grade class was white. They were like, you sound different. First of all, I was rocking my United Colors of Benetton, so I looked like a Skittle. Like I walked in, I had my leg warmer, my little gold leg warmers on, and I forget what are the name of the pants that come down and cinch right at your knee? What's that? They're not culottes. What are they?
They're not jodhpurs, are they?
No,
oh, that's an old term.
So first off,
I
don't even know what that is.
White thing, right?
Anyway, these pants.
Yes,
these pants. I loved those pants. They were very much a thing in like the early 80s, like between like 81, to 82, and I used to rock them. It would be denim right at the knee, wool right at the knee. And then you would wear these socks or leg warmers
with
and then
stripes.
And a gold belt and I was looking crazy. So I'm sure they were like, what is up with this sister here? And they would say, hey, and I would be like, hello, and they were like, hello, what? So I ended up in a fight because of the way I spoke. And so we've definitely had this conversation around affect and the limitations of how people see blackness.
Absolutely.
Like your affect has to be one way, which goes across the spectrum, right? It was like, oh, that person's really black or that person's not black at all. And we're not one thing.
Right.
We don't speak one way. We don't dress one way. We don't show up one way.
Yeah. Well, I have a similar story about my first year in Georgia. I was in high school at the Academy of Richmond County, which was the oldest military academy for boys. It wasn't desegregated until like the mid 70s, right? So I get there in like late 70s in my European military flair, bell bottoms, American flag on my behind, much to my father's dismay, but hey, rocked him anyway. And having to explain that first year of 9th grade, who I was, where I came from, why did I look the way I did, who were my people, because of course, most of those folks went to school, not only went to high school together, but they also went to elementary school together, so there was this sort of familiar thing. So so I have similar stories about dress and how, odd you looked and how white people thought you were because you didn't have that particular look that folks were used to seeing at the Academy of Richmond County in Augusta,
scared
Georgia.
About the Academy of Richmond County in Augusta, Georgia. That sounds like a scary place.
So it was an interesting place.
Yeah. Well, moving a little bit, which is still in this identity journey, you have shared with me very openly, and folk who know you know your identity as a queer person as well. Do you use the word queer?
I do.
I wanted to ask you that, and I don't know if that's a generational thing too, because I feel like sometimes when I talk to older folk who consider themselves lesbian or bi, they're like, I don't know if I would use queer. Like, I've also, like, there's a person who, my friend Mo, who is going to be interviewed, who lives in New York. We've talked quite a bit about, like, Mo being an OG butch lesbian. And as an OG butch lesbian, like, the evolution of the language that is used, and, like, how Mo has, like, navigated and found their place inside the language that continues to grow and develop, as it should. Because,
of course.
Because, you know, our parents, you know, at one point your dad was colored. And he was Negro. So I don't, that's not surprising to me.
Right.
But you also still get to choose what you want to be called and identified as. And I'm just,
so that's also very interesting. I've always considered myself sexually fluid. And, you know, in my family, the joke is that I'm European. And so, you know,
and so because you're European, you'll have sex with anybody.
Well, no,
or you're attracted to anybody.
Well, it's more of a function of sort of, you know, that freedom, right? Again, you know, we're back to the being free part.
Okay.
And so, you know, that to me has always been super funny because, you know, it's just, it's kind of a funny thing to say. That said, though, I consider myself very sexually fluid. And for me, the notion of being queer, I typically, when I use that term, it's usually with people who identify as queer, right? For whom that word makes sense or who use it, you know, with some regularity. For me personally, I don't consider myself labeled in that way. And I think that also is a function of being biracial and bicultural because I think it puts you in a box that you don't necessarily fit and don't want to be in. And so for me personally, but I'm always respectful of people who want to have that label attached to them in whatever way. I mean, I have older white male gay friends who still use the term fag, which, you know, for me is a pejorative term, but for them generationally makes sense.
Right.
And so, I don't, to me, the label is insignificant, but I am always respectful of if that is your label, I'm happy to use it because I want to make sure that I respect and honor, you know, who you are and how you feel. Yeah.
How do you find yourself now in this, you know, late 50s phase of good loving? Like, how are you navigating that? How do you find that revealing itself to you at this point?
I will just say I am open, right? So that's not just with being partnered, but that's with life in general. I've learned that you have to be open if you want to grow. And so part of that growth and part of how I move through the world is with curiosity and openness. And so that has been, and I will say that's not just been over the last couple of years, but that's been over the last probably 10 to 15 years as I've grown more comfortable with myself and comfortable with how I move through the world. Open is always what resonates for me. And I hope that when I interact with people that I also offer that to folks for them to be open. And so I would say that I can't answer that question real succinctly because it's still evolving. And I'm happy with that, right? I'm fine with that and I lean into that.
Can I ask you if you're dating?
I am not at the moment.
Okay. I've been thinking about dating a lot. I feel like I'm a little bit obsessed with it.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. It's like I'm obsessed with something that I'm not doing.
Right.
And I'm obsessed with something that I want to do differently. So
makes sense.
Maybe obsession is a strong word, but I do think about it quite a bit. And I think about it quite a bit because I'm thinking about where do I meet people where I can explore my true self.
Right.
I'm like, I don't know. Like, where are these people? Where will I find these people? Will I happen upon this person at Harris Teeter? Or
in the produce aisle?
In the hey, those Brussels sprouts look good. What's up?
You know,
is that going to be...
Want to share those with me?
Is that going to be my thing?
You know, what's interesting about that for me, I'm really tied to energy, right? So I will say, even as a young person, I was never like a big dater, right? For me, it was all about energy. If you and I connected, and there was something off about your energy, I would pull back. And that remains true at age 57. That doesn't mean you and I can't be friends, but the intimate parts of that, energetically, I have to be connected to you. And so,
I think that's a good exemplar is our friendship.
Oh,
right?
totally.
Because I think that when we met, I was like, there's something about this person. I want to get to know this person. And then the more time we spent together, I felt like the more I saw your spirit, I saw you. We continue to have very intimate conversations. So I feel like we have a real deep level of intimacy with each other. So I get the whole energy thing and like why that is important to like whomever you're going to spend time with on an intimate level, whether that's an intimate romantic level or friendship level.
I agree. And a lot of it is, again, I hate to be redundant, but the whole notion of being open, right? So the fact that I opened myself up to our energetic exchange then allowed me to sort of allow this friendship to blossom into what it is today. But I also felt immediately when I met you, I was like, wow, this is somebody I want to know for the rest of my life. Right? And I can't say that about a whole lot of people. And that, that's neither good nor bad. But for me, it's, I know what I know. And I know that when I come upon someone and energetically they match or they complement or whatever the connection is, there's some people with whom I have very brief connections and I'm good with that. And I know that, right? I know that going in that this is a person that I will spend a small amount of time with and then they'll be gone from my life for whatever reason. But then there are people that I meet and I'm like, that's a person who I'm going to know for the rest of my life. And so for me, it's an energetic exchange. And, it's hard to explain to people because I have friends who are on dating apps and who have had a lot of really good success. I'm not that person.
I don't think I'm that person. Barbara.
And I'm okay with that. I used to give myself a hard time about that. And then I'm like, you know what? Embrace that. You can't be like so-and-so and this other person. You have to be who you are. And for me, that doesn't work. That doesn't mean that I don't cheer you on when it works for you. But I also know me and I'm like, no, for me, it's about energy. And I know it when I'm in a room with it. I feel it when I'm connected to it. At this age, I have to go with that.
So I think that's my challenge. I think it's very hard for me to connect with someone energetically on these dating apps because the way that the app is set up, the way the algorithm works, like first off, when you set up your profile, you have to like check these boxes, right? So you got to figure out which boxes you're fitting into. Right. And then you have to say what you're interested in and you give age ranges, mileage. Like how far are you willing to go for an orgasm? 99 miles. I'm only willing to go.
Nothing more than 100 miles.
That's it. If I can't get an orgasm 100 miles, I'm not doing it. So you got that kind of situation going on. And then you make the connection with this person. You choose them. And then you have to initiate this conversation. Clearly, I'm talking about Bumble. Right. You have to make the connection. And then you're kind of waiting for the energy to present itself. Right. And it just does it. Right. Because it's virtual and you're just thinking.
And it's forced. There's a forced component. There's a forced aspect to it. And I don't do well with those kind of situations. I just don't. And so, you know what? I got to embrace who I am and I enjoy the people that I interact with and I keep myself open because I know that it's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's just when. Because energetically, I'm really cognizant of the energy I put out. And so, I'm interested. I like people. Right? Even though I'm an introvert, there's something about the human condition and the fact that everyone you meet has a story of some sort. And what does that story say about them? And, how does that story inform how you relate to them? So for me, I just enjoy people. Now, if something amazing and magical happens from that energetic exchange, I'm all over it. But to your point about the dating app, not my thing. Yeah.
So we've talked quite a bit about you realizing that there was a specialness about you as a child, that became more clear to you now that you have language for it, that you are an empath, you're intuitive, and that you've done quite a bit of study around this. And I'm just wondering, you know, like, I do think that my post 40 or my post 50 self, I've been giving myself more permission to trust my gut, which is a scary thing, right? Because you have two brains, one that's sitting on top of your shoulders and one that's sitting by your belly button. And the one that's below my belly button, I have not always trusted her. And I'm wondering, or I'm curious, like, as you continue to be on your journey of your practice around meditation and contemplative practice and yoga, has your journey with menopause or aging, like, amplified that for you? Like, have you noticed a difference in that for you?
Yes, but I'm not sure if it's related to menopause. So I went into menopause when I was 50. I remember being at my acupuncture appointment. I must have been like right at 49. I think I was 49, turning 50 like in a few weeks. And my acupuncturist, who's 10 years older than I am, shared with me an experience and said, when you turn 50 and go into menopause, she said, the whole world will open for you. And I'm like, okay, well, that sounds cool. So I turned 50. I stopped having my cycle, and I thought that the world was going to end. I remember that first year thinking, I'm no longer fertile. Now, mind you, I've never given birth to anything, physically. And so for me to even say that, I remember calling a friend of mine saying, oh my God, I'm in menopause. And the person saying to me, okay, and so coming to terms with that was sort of interesting, right? I mean, just that whole notion.
It's a thing.
It is a thing.
I absolutely, I don't know if I cried. I didn't burst into tears when it was like I realized that I hadn't had a period in a year. But there was this realization of, oh, you won't be able to have, like, say for example, like randomly, you wanted to have another kid.
Right.
This is it. You're done.
You're done. Right.
You're done. So you have walked through a portal into a new place.
Absolutely. And I agree with that 100%. Once I got over the shock of not having my period for a while, it was truly liberating. I mean, it was liberating for a whole bunch of reasons, from an expense perspective, just from just freeing. It was a whole bunch of things that it allowed you to do. But I'll also say that my acupuncturist was accurate. One of the things she said to me is, you will stop giving a fuck about a whole bunch of things. And that actually happened. And so I tell people who are close to 50, when you turn 50, just know that the fucks you used to give will be less and less, because you've now come into your own in a way that no one can really predict, other than those people who are currently in it can share that information with you. Right. And it is indeed true. So that said, I've had a spiritual practice probably my entire life in some form or fashion. But I will say the mid-90s, I shared this with you not too long ago, I learned how to do yoga in a Hindu temple. After that, I had a yoga practice that was not as consistent as I wanted it to be, but I grew out of that sort of inconsistent yoga practice, did grow a meditation practice. And so for me, yoga is less about exercise, it's more about meditation. So over the last 20, 30 years, or 20-something years, I should say, my meditation has changed in such a way that it's gotten deeper. And part of that depth also had to do with taking time for myself in silent retreat mode. And so I've been on several silent retreats over the last 5 years. And every time I come out of one, my spiritual practice is deepened. In the last 2 years, I've done silent retreats in a cohort. Okay. And so part of that experience has been has had a real deepening effect on how I meditate, the type of meditation that I do, and also how yoga sort of interacts with that. I will also say that over the last probably 4 or 5 years, I've managed to meditate at least once a day, which was foreign to me prior to that. Okay. I discovered when I say discovered, I discovered it for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yoga Nidra, which,
what is
yes.
Yoga Nidra?
So Yoga Nidra is, if someone had told me that years ago, that all I needed to do was be in Shavasana, close my eyes.
Okay, hold on. For folk who don't practice yoga and are not familiar with the different postures, which are also called asanas, Shavasana is known as the corpse pose, which is what you do at the end of a yoga practice session.
Right, exactly. And Yoga Nidra is designed for that pose.
Ooh.
So you are in Shavasana or corpse pose the entire time. You are asked to pay attention to certain parts of your body. So it is a guided meditation. And there is a sleep-wake component. So you're in this very deep relaxation. You are asked to pay attention to your arm, your legs. And through that, incredibly relaxing, number one. But it also allows you, a lot of people say that meditation doesn't work for them because your mind is constantly going. Well, one way to stop that or to mitigate that is to pay attention or to focus on parts of your body. And so by doing that, you really just sort of go deep within yourself. And a lot of people have said that, 45 minutes of Yoga Nidra is like 3 hours of restful sleep. So I came upon this on YouTube, oddly enough, about 5 years ago. And it was a practice that I did twice a day for about for almost 4 years. And then I sort of graduated into other meditation. And during that time, I also discovered silent retreats with a cohort. And all of that has deepened my practice. And I'll say it's also helped me with menopause. Because part of the challenge, as you know, with menopause is hot flashes, mood swings, all of those sorts of things. And I will say that being able to practice meditation and Yoga Nidra in particular helped to mitigate some of those challenges.
I was just thinking while you were saying being in a 45-minute session of Shavasana, and I was like, okay, what would that look like if I could drop down deep into my womb, which I haven't had a cycle now in 7 years. If I could drop down deep into the place where my insomnia lives, right? Because it's temporal.
Right.
So there are times where I feel like, I have beaten insomnia. We've broken up.
Yes.
I've sent insomnia packing. And then insomnia shows up through we're like,
outside.
Hey girl, hey, I'm back. And you're like, oh shit, I thought I put you out.
Oh, right.
So, and of course there are people who talk a lot about not only meditative practices and physical practices, but also your diet and what you eat. So I feel like perhaps what we're offering to folk who are going to listen to this podcast is that there are a lot of different tools, actually.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And this is an energetic tool.
It is. It's an energetic tool. I will also say, I've been taking vitamins since I was in my mid-30s, which helped to fortify. My cycle used to be really off when I was in my mid-30s. And as I started taking vitamins and really taking care of that piece of it, I think that also helped me, with menopause. And also, some of us are super sensitive to sugar, right? And that's sugar of all forms. So I know what makes my body scream and has the insomnia coming back with all of its baggage. And I know not to do some of those things. Yeah. And the minute I do those, it's like, yeah, girl. You knew. What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Hello, I'm back.
He's like, yeah, I'm sure you're back because I ate all of that sugar today. Right. Yeah. No, that's useful. I appreciate that. We are interested this year in 2020 of inviting healers, naturopathic doctors, traditional medicine, folk who do energy work to talk about some of those tools, like very, very specific tools like meditation, like acupuncture, like Reiki, energy work. Also, like for people who are not as open to Eastern or non-traditional or homeopathic medicine and they feel like they want more information about hormone replacement or, whatever. Like I want folk to have the bodily autonomy and the information to make whatever choices they feel like they want to make in this stage as they're navigating through it.
Yeah. I will say that my mother was on hormone replacement therapy and as a result of that had cancer and died. And so my aunt, her sister, and I had a long conversation about that as I was going into menopause, and for myself decided that I was not going to take any kind of hormone replacement therapy. And so I've done it. I've managed it through acupuncture, through massage, through meditation, through diet, through, vitamins, that sort of thing. My father's sister used to say, it's not going to kill you. Mm-hmm. So just, move through it.
Yeah.
It's a change of life. It's not the change.
That's right.
And so, I've embraced that. And, I feel comfortable with where I am. I was telling my acupuncturist a couple days ago that I haven't had a hot flash in a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And not that I miss them, but it was like, gosh, where are you? Kind of thing. And so I will say that, you can move through this time in your life by giving yourself grace. Mm-hmm. Feel what you need to feel. I have friends who have, whose moods are, up and down, up and down. Sometimes you just have to feel those things in order to move through them and to be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
I think we're at a pivotal point when you're this age, and that's anywhere from 50 to anywhere past that. We have so much more to offer and so much more to give. And we can do that while we're going through menopause and realize that our lives aren't over. Mm-hmm. For some of us, our lives are just starting.
This is true.
Yeah.
You know what you just did? I was going to shift gears into what your offering could be. Because, you participated in one of our community intergenerational conversations where we talk about intimacy and pleasure and body and all these things. And we made a commitment at the end of 2019 that we were going to actually create a tangible guide that is interactive, that folk will be able to purchase and work with themselves. And then once they work with it for a period of time, we're not sure what we will suggest. They have to gift it to someone in another generation. And they get to decide if someone who's older or younger, but that will be that exchange, that gift. And so I'm wondering if you have, in addition to what you've offered, which has been so lovely, around being patient with yourself and gracious with yourself, and that this is a new beginning again. What else would you want to offer to the guide if you wanted to offer like one more thing?
Sure. And I think I said it earlier, to stay open. I think sometimes we close ourselves off when we're having physical challenges or emotional challenges. We tend to sort of go inward, but not necessarily in a positive way. And I would say that, this is a time of your life, and I say this to younger women as well, this time of your life when you're going through menopause is a time to be open. I mean, I think you need to be open your entire life anyway, but I think even more so as you get older, because there is so much more value placed on being young. And so as we get older, how do you navigate that? Well, you navigate that by being open and receptive, energetically. So I would say open, being open and receptive.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was lovely.
Oh, this was great.
Was lovely.
I appreciate you, Barbara, so much.
Well, and likewise.
Thanks so much for listening to this latest episode of the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause. We have a brand new website that we want you to check out. Is the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause.com. That's where you can learn more about why I began this journey, what we're hoping to accomplish, what we believe in about Black women and aging in this country. So check us out. There's also a drop-down window on the page where you can share your stories of self-care and how you're taking care of yourself while we're self-quarantining during COVID-19. I want to remind folk that if you're interested in being a monthly sustainer or making a love offering to the content creation and the work that we're doing to bring you these stories of Black women, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page. The link is on our website. Or you can make a one-time donation to our Cash App, and that is the $OMITUTU. That's $OMITUTU. Or our Venmo, which is the @OMISADE5. Any offering that is made helps to support the creation and the production of the podcast, and we appreciate your support either way. If you have listener letters that you would like to offer a critique, a question, or a subject that you would like for us to discuss on the podcast, please send it to decolonizingthecrone@gmail.com. That's decolonizingthecrone@gmail.com. And we will take that listener letter and we will make it manifest. Thank you so much for listening to this latest episode of the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause. We hope everyone is doing well and staying healthy. We'll see you on the dark side of the moon.